I'm just going to share my screen momentarily. Right, okay, hi. My name is Reza. I'm an ex-JavaScript software engineer, and I started building SPAs back in 2013 for enterprise firms. I fell into SEO in 2014 and ended up co-founding SALT. Now onto the talk for a bit of history lesson to begin with. So most of us know how websites generally work. Browser sends a request to the server. The server generally compiles pages. It works out the logic, grabs the data, puts all of it together nicely from the database. And then the browser gets back the data and then renders it. It messes about a little bit with the CSS and makes it pretty. There is some JavaScript that goes into it and makes Ajax calls or nowadays over sockets and everything else, but that's pretty much it. And it's still to this day, with some exceptions, majority of the platforms that you see work like that, and it hasn't changed much in the last 20 years. Now, there are tons of problems with this. Generally, with these kind of websites, you can't scale your development teams much, and full stack developers are across the website. Rendering is quite heavy and dependent on the server, which means for popular websites, it is very costly for the companies to run it. Now, at the same time, almost all the interactions require a fresh set of pages. So every time you click on a link, majority of the times, the page opens up from scratch, everything else gets called in, and then you'll see the website. And then finally, we burn a lot of cash by using resources that we don't need to, because we can have them all running on the user's idle CPU and let the user render it. So that's a few problems that you tend to see with the old systems. Now, there is a better way of doing it, and that's through single page applications. So a single page application is essentially a website or an application that interacts with the browser and dynamically rewrites the current web page. So any changes within the page only requires a small set of data to be sent. The way it works is visually is the browser sends a request to the server. Server sends back the most basic type of data. So you will have a page that's almost empty and contains very basic elements. And then your modern browser handles the rest of it through JavaScript and the communications and through APIs. And the data is pulled back in through the API communications, and it's all rendered up. Majority of the new modern platforms and frameworks, such as Gatsby, Netlify, and everything else run through that. And I will come to it shortly. Now, why is this better? Because it lets everybody do what they're very, very good at. Engineers can focus on creating super fast websites and focusing on their platforms. Designers can make design changes to the site without actually modifying any of the core platform code and posts. And then content producers will be able to produce the content and upload the files without having to break the platform or the design. And these are the three different segments that contribute to each other. So the engineers will work, for example, with the core networking side, such as Netlify. Designers will work with the front-end code, such as React.js and the CSS. And then content producers will work with the headless CMSs. So a headless CMS is essentially a platform on the front end that provides APIs to give the data out. And it doesn't require the rest of the platform to be running. Now, there is more benefits to it than just the developers and the people side. It is really, really fast. So your TTFB generally is extremely quick. And because you're sending very little amount of data, you can load up the instantaneous side of the page, of that small page, very, very quickly. So in the screenshot here, you're seeing a 36 millisecond TTFB on a Netlify network. I've seen this going down to 15 milliseconds. If you were, for example, on Cloudflare, probably you can get that down to about 9 milliseconds. It's also amazingly fast on the UX side. So I've shared the video of a website called the Stoplight, which runs on React.js and Netlify. And if you view it, you can see how quickly the pages change. I'll just repeat that again as well for people who have not seen it. And you can see the interaction is super fast and file load times are really, really quick. Now, there is a problem with most of this. And it's the reaction I tend to get from all the SEOs when I talk about SPAs and React.js websites and anything similar. And it's this. Most SEOs I talk to tend to feel like the website's going to crash and the rankings are going to crash. But I can assure you that JavaScript and SPAs do not crash your rankings. Lack of good architecture and development crashes your ranking. That's not to say that the SEOs don't have anything to worry about. A lot of the developers are also clueless about our needs as SEOs. Now, here's what typically happens. Imagine your SPA platform or your website as an artist trying to draw a beautiful website with the stand as the host and the canvas as the browser. Our SPAs, on SPAs, the artist does not need to redraw the painting. And if you want to make the changes, all you need to do is to make a very small change. So on this, and in this example, you've got the website there. If I want to make one little change, I'll just redraw that side. And then if I want to go to another page, I'll just redraw that part of it. On the initial load, the website does need to load a lot of the SPA code up, but the rest of it is very, very quick. Now, a search engine, on the other hand side, is in a rush and don't want to see all that to happen. All he wants to see is the finished product, well, sort of. So the faster we can do this, the better it is. And for now, it's very, very costly for search engines to go ahead and render the entire page. So this is not the kind of code we want to see on a website. We want to see that being rendered, as we call it. Now, what are the solutions to this? One is for us to create a fully static website. So think about old school HTML. We pre-generate all the HTML pages and we serve them through the server directly to the user. In modern world, we use generators and templating systems like Jekyll and Hugo, and then we upload them on platforms like Netlify. But you can't realistically do this for larger websites or any website that requires a form of dynamicness, so user interaction and so forth. So you move on to a different way of handling this, and it's called isomorphic JavaScript. So in other words, you can call it pre-rendering or dynamic rendering. Different people at different levels call it differently. So the way it works is you create a cache of the page on the first request that goes out, or you pre-generate the page, and then you let the JavaScript handle the rest of it for the normal users. But essentially, every time, for example, a search engine calls your website, the pre-rendered version is served to the search engine, whereas for the user, you don't have to serve the pre-rendered version, although we still, at this moment of time, recommend users to serve the pre-rendered version because of cost of rendering for the users. And it's all very, very easy to do thanks to Jamstack. So with loads of platforms that most of us know, like Vue.js, Netlify, Next, Contentful, and they all work together. And of course, the king of them all, React.js. Now, Jamstack is built around JavaScript, APIs, and markups. Headless CMS that we hear about is essentially allows you to store your content on another platform, and it will handle your content and assets. And they generally even have APIs to compress and pre-process your images, videos. And some of the examples of this is Contentful and Content Stack, which is around quite a lot. And then you have your building and processing, which is the markup generator, such as Gatsby and Next.js. They're essentially there to handle your templating, all your comms with React, and they even do your pre-rendering if you do want them to do that. And finally, you have your hosting environments, such as Netlify, S3, and GitHub Pages, which essentially serve your static files that are generated. And from there onwards, then you will have platforms such as Lambda and Cloudflare sitting in front of them for additional bits that the standard Jamstack platform can't do. Now, talking about can't do, Jamstack also has its own problems. And generally, those issues are around architecture and platform engineering that causes problems for SEOs. I'm going to walk through some of the most popular platforms and share some tips for you on these. So GitHub Pages is where you're essentially generating your website through like Jekyll, and then the file is being saved into a GitHub repository, and then it's served from a GitHub page. I only recommend this for very, very small websites because it does not handle page duplication well, such as trailing slashes, and you cannot do 301 redirects because you cannot change the header response of the server. You can fix this through Cloudflare Workers. And if you do want a sample code from me, I'll get in touch with me and I will share that with you. I've done this a few times for a few SaaS companies who generally tend to host their documentations on GitHub. You have AWS S3, which sits behind CloudFront, and then in some cases Lambda. Again, it's very similar in terms of issues to GitHub Pages, but through advanced engineering and all the other platforms that AWS and Amazon provide and functions that they provide, it is a flawless platform to work with, but it requires heavy engineering and almost over-engineering some cases if you want to run all of this through. You can fix most of the issues, almost in fact all the issues, through AWS Lambda, where it sits on the edge and fixes the issues. And finally, you have Netlify. Now, Netlify is a little bit more different. It is designed for single page applications and static sites. It is probably the most complete package that you can get without having to over-engineer your entire website. You can use it for very, very large websites. It's almost issue-free, and it provides something called Netlify Functions, which runs on Lambda, or to handle niggly issues of Jamstack, or you can use Cloudflare Workers to handle the bigger issues, which I will get to shortly. Now, given that Netlify is the easiest, I thought I would share some of the tips for SEOs on it. When your developers are working on Netlify, make sure when they are releasing the site and doing preview branches, they are blocking the preview branches. So you can put a code in there and say, if it's not a production version, please set the branch into no index, no follow, because otherwise Google will cache it and they will crawl it. Also on Netlify, I would suggest that you turn on your asset optimizations because it handles your URL redirects for you automatically, handles CSS minifications, image compression if you go through their network. It's a little bit different if you do not use them as your main DNS provider. In that format, then you can't even put the website on www by a standard. It's a really, really good platform. But coming to this, the biggest issue with Jamstack is that it doesn't handle 404s for dynamic pages. What this means is that if you're trying to cache a page once it's been called by a user rather than pre-generated on the server beforehand, the server doesn't actually know if the page exists or not. And for 404 pages, it will just return a 200. So what you need to do on a Jamstack platform is you use edge functions such as Cloudflare Workers, serverless on Netlify or Lambda to detect whether that page doesn't truly exist and return a 404 if it doesn't exist. And I guess it all comes down to whether this all works, because a lot of people are suspicious that if this works. So what I'm going to do is actually share some results with you. We have been recommending Jamstack and React.js as a front end to a lot of our clients for the last 2 years, and we have never seen any issues whatsoever. And the only issues we have seen has been when the developers and the engineers haven't carried out the work accurately as we've asked them to. So here is an example on a fintech client, and they have a very, very high brand volume. You're looking at hundreds of thousands of searches, and we can see where they have moved on to React.js and the impressions going up from there. And I also have another client here, which is a SaaS client of ours, and they went on to a React site back in February, and straight away they started growing, and they have not seen any issues. I think the graph speaks for itself. There is not much to say that it doesn't work. And if anyone's got any further questions on this, please do ask me and send me questions, and I will answer them. Thank you very much. And also follow me on Twitter if you want to know more of SPAs and JavaScript and anything else that you find.